Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. My name is Ruben Mendive, and I am your host. Today's guest, I first found out about when I was in Atwater Village. I was at a tiny theater there, and I was going to a friend's thing, and I'm walking around waiting for friends to show up, and I see this big poster, and it says, "Wet, a documented journey." And I was just like, who is this? So I took a picture of the poster because I was like, I have to look this person up, find out what they're about. And yeah, so that's how our guest sort of came about. So I like to have my guests introduce themselves, just a little bit of who you are and how you identify, just so the audience can get familiar with your voice too.
What time is it? It's 11:47. Buenos días, gente. Mi nombre es Alex Alpharaoh, or Alex Alpharaoh. Alfaro para los blanquitos and Alfaro para la raza. I identify as he, him. Cis hetero male. Soy de Guatemala. Identify as Guatemalan, undocumented American, formerly undocumented American. I rep South Central Los Angeles to the fullest. That's been my home. Echo Park in South Central have been my home for the majority of my 36 years on this planet.
All right, great. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So where are you from originally? I know that's a complicated question.
Originally?
That's what I have to say. Because I know a little bit about your story, so I want to start there. So
sure, most definitely. So I was born in Guatemala City, Guatemala, which is the capital of Guatemala. My parents immigrated here when they were teenagers themselves. My father came to the United States a few months before I was born. Mm-hmm. And my mother brought me over here from the capital when I was just a 3-month-old baby. She was a 15-year-old unaccompanied minor, mm-hmm. with a newborn child with her. And it took us maybe about a month or a month and a half to make it to the southern border, where I died. Mm-hmm. I died from yellow fever, and I died because we were starving. My mom didn't have any breast milk, and there wasn't any more food. She had gotten robbed, so the money that she was traveling with just kind of disappeared one day. And so, coming to the United States was probably one of the most dangerous and irresponsible things that a 15-year-old child could do. Mm-hmm. But then again, she was 15. What does she know,
Yeah.
But then also it was the biggest blessing because my father never wanted us to grow up the way that he grew up, in the extreme levels of poverty and violence and drugs that are still prevalent in the capital of Guatemala today. So,
and that journey, you said it took a month. Like, what do you know about that journey? What has your mom told you about that journey?
So all of that is chronicled in my solo show, Wet, a Documented Journey. And I go into a brief synopsis of what that was like. Mm-hmm. Pero, basically the whole reason why my mother decided to take the risk as a 15-year-old unaccompanied minor back when I was only 3 months old is she recently told me a story that she was taking me to go get my shots. And she walked to the bus stop in the corner of where she grew up. She grew up in what's called La Limonada, La Colonia, La Zona 5 in Guatemala. She grew up across the street from El Estadio Mateo Flores, which is on 12 Avenida y 23 Calle. So she says she was leaving her house, and she was taking me to go get a shot or some kind of doctor's appointment, and she's waiting at the bus stop, and she realizes that she doesn't have her bus card. Mm-hmm. And she didn't want to risk getting on the bus. She could have asked the driver, can you show me some sympathy and some compassion? I have a newborn. She was sure that the driver would, but she wasn't too sure if the trip back was going to be a hassle. So rather than risk it, she goes, I got about 10 minutes before the bus comes. I'm going to run back home, pick up my bus card, and then come back. She says she left, and as she was leaving and she was going into the area where my grandmother's house is located, there was a giant blast. There was a giant explosion. Oh, wow. And she looked back and she walked over to where she was at, and it turned out that the bus stop where we were waiting at, underneath the bench, there was a bomb that had detonated. because whoever put the bomb there was trying to target the military envoys that used to travel through that main road, because there's a military base maybe about a mile and a half from there. And so I guess they were targeting them. And so my mother realized that if she would have stayed there with me, the bomb would have gone off and it would have killed both of us. So she decided to make that journey. My father, on the other hand, was already here in the United States. He was studying to become a public defender in Guatemala, but he came out here and he needed to work. So he took a job as an apprentice for a car shop, and he started learning how to paint cars. And what my father would do is that he would save as much money as he could every week by living off of a single egg and a slice of bread every day. So he would buy a dozen eggs and he would buy a loaf of bread, and that's what he would feed himself every day, and until he saved up enough money so that he could send for my mom and I to come over. So that whole process for them must have been no more than a couple of months. It was definitely less than a year. My father was here for about 6 months, and then my mother joined them a few months after. And coming to the United States, according to my mother, was, very, very traumatic and very, very painful. It's very difficult for her to relive those stories, and it's even more difficult for her to see her son reenacting those stories on a professional national stage, and to see her story being played out and have it resonate with the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of people that understand what that journey is like. Being Latinx in the United States, we all have that origin story. Many of our parents came very similarly. Some of them had more resources, some of them had less resources, and so for her to see that story play out, it's a reminder for her that her sacrificio was not in vain, because she raised 4 kids basically by herself as a single mother who was an undocumented immigrant herself in the United States for many years, until she remarried after my father passed away here in Los Angeles. She became a permanent resident. She learned English. She taught herself English by watching PBS, by watching Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and reading Rainbow and that kind of programming. And she eventually went to school, earned 2 degrees in college, completely assimilated. So when people say, you're first generation, I'm like, well, technically my mother is first generation, because my mother came here as a child, and she assimilated into the country, and me being an undocumented person in the United States was something that wasn't really discussed, because I was the only person in my family who didn't have any kind of papers. So my mom used to be like, don't you ever tell anyone that you don't have papeles. As far as anyone's concerned, you were born here. Just like your brothers and your sister and your cousins and your nieces and your nephews and your tias. Everybody has papers. You're the only one that doesn't have papers. The moment you tell somebody you don't have papers, te van a deportar. You know what I mean? So it was something that always... It was like a really fucked up halo over my head. It's like, you don't have papers. Don't tell anybody you don't have papers.
Yeah, and it's definitely like a narrative that I think we're just starting to break the surface on.
Most definitely.
Like the trauma, the shadow that hangs over your head. How you can have a mixed status family, and some people are safe and other people still have to carry it, or you get your residency or citizenship and then someone else in your family doesn't have it, so it's still like it's not something that just goes away.
No, it doesn't. I mean, and I would have thought, this was a very naive thought that I had once, is like, once I get my papers, everything's going to be fine. If I ever get my papers, there was always that if I ever get my papers, right? And so, thank the universe and our blessed mother that, I did. But now my responsibility is to my extended family, is to the community, is to the people that don't have the resources, that don't have the privileges, that even though I was undocumented for 35 years, I'm on the other side now, and I can't just turn my back on that. I can't just be like, okay, everything's fine now because my mother's a citizen, my brother's a citizen, my kid's a citizen, my partner's a citizen, right? There's a bigger, greater social responsibility that comes with putting up the kind of work that I've chosen to put up as an artist. And for me to ignore that is just negligent.
Yeah, because that sort of like sense of mission and purpose comes from the years of trauma. Like, you know, like I said, it doesn't go away.
Right.
And you know all the bullshit.
Most
like,
definitely.
You know, like what it took and how lucky you were to even get it.
Right.
You know, I think people like to talk a lot about immigration. I think as a general culture, we don't know that much about it.
Yeah.
It's a number one topic on every campaign, but nobody knows what the hell they're talking about.
Oh yeah, no, that's the biggest thing, right? And you just mentioned something that can potentially be very triggering to audiences that are listening or will be listening in the future. It's like, oh, I'm so lucky because I got it. It's like it's not. We have to change that ideology because we are deserving of that. Is that these policies are policies that were created to affect the original inhabitants of this land. We are the original inhabitants of this land. We did not come here on a boat. You know what I mean? It's so tragically ironic that they call us wetbacks. You know what I mean? Where it's like, I didn't come here on a boat. I didn't come here on the Mayflower. You know, my ancestors weren't starving because they were criminals and they got kicked out of Europe. You know what I mean? It's like we've migrated. Migration is a normal part of human life. It's something that we've been doing for the totality of our existence, even before recorded time. You know what I mean? You have these people that tout religion left and right. Well, what do you think Jesus did? He walked around everywhere and he migrated from place to place, from town to town. If you've ever grown up in a city and then you move to a different city, if you're from New York and you move to Chicago, guess what? You're migrating. You know what I mean? It's like all we're doing is migrating on the lands that have always been ours. It's just that they've been stolen and these policies have been put into place. So it's ridiculous when you hear someone like the 45th and his administration talk about we're closed. You know, we're full. The country is full. How the fuck can you determine? I don't know if I can cuss.
You can.
Okay. How the fuck can you determine whether or not a country is full? Right? Whether the allocated resources are there. It's like, no, if you look at the disbalance and the lack of equity in the way that resources and finances are used in the United States, then you see where the problem really lies. It doesn't lie with the poor. And the problem is that they convince these poor white people who are not necessarily the enemy, quote unquote, because what is the enemy? The enemy is the idea and the systemic oppression. Is not necessarily the color of your skin. You know, you convince these people to vote against their best interest because they don't know any better. They
have an enemy.
Exactly.
You know?
And they have a common enemy.
You point at it's that person's fault, then you're like, great, we know who to blame.
Right.
You know?
It's like build a wall. It's just like, what the fuck do you think a wall's gonna do? It's not gonna do anything.
And I think it is interesting, you know, because, you know, I am an immigrant. I consider myself lucky too. But you're right. It is. I also do understand that it is like I consider myself like blessed and lucky that I was able to be a citizen. But again, we're working within a rigged system, a system that was designed to purposely make it impossible for us.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I look at my daughter. I have a 17-year-old daughter, and you know, she just got her first passport in the mail, you know, because we're taking a trip to Guatemala next month. And I saw her passport and I looked at her passport and I just kind of stared at it. And I said, you know, baby, do you know how fortunate you are that you have this blue booklet, and this blue booklet gives you access to almost any place in the world. I said, you know how lucky you are? And my daughter's a smart ass. She looked at me and she goes, of course I know how lucky I am, Dad. I've gone through this with you. I'm going through this process with you. Wow. So I know. So just to answer your question, going back in regards to like mixed status families is, you know, yes, fortunate, right, that everyone in my family, whether it's, you know, it's a distant relative or immediate relative, they're all either naturalized citizens or you know, birthright citizens who were born here. And I think that part of what makes us a mixed status is that none of us forget where we come from, and none of us forget our upbringings. And we still have a few members of our tribes that are still in Guatemala. You know, I have family members that wish they could come to the United States, and they say, "Do you think it's worth coming to the United States?" And it hurts me to say, no. It's not. Like, coming to this country, and you know, my father used to say it when he was alive, bless his soul. It's like, este país no es como me lo pintaron. You know, my father once confided in his best friend, because I recently had a conversation with his best friend when I was touring my show and I was in Chicago. And his best friend said to me, "You know what your father said to me once?" He said, "Mira vos, yo la cagué. Porque yo traje a mis hijos a este país. Yo traje a mi hijo a este país, el más grande, a este país, pensando que le iba a dar las oportunidades que yo no tenía en Guatemala. Y esta mierda está peor."
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it is interesting, because if people did ask me that, I would say, I don't know. Yeah. Because it's, you know, again, you know, these are like immigration laws and policies are something that the government implements. Like, they have purposely made it harder to, you know, come into this country, to stay in this country, to, you know, survive in this country. Yeah. Like, you get deported, that's a 10-year ban signed under Clinton in the 90s. Like, these are
absolutely
these affect real people every day. Like, there are members of my family that would have loved to go back for funerals or visit family they haven't seen in 10 years, but they can't risk leaving kids at home, you know?
Right.
To that point, did your family come straight to the LA area, or?
Yeah, we all migrated. Everyone migrated to the Los Angeles area, to the downtown LA area. I think my first relatives that came here from my father's generation came in the late 70s, so like 79, 80 was when the first members of my immediate family arrived, and these were members of my father's family. My mother's family is small. It's always been, you know, my mother, her sister, my grandmother, and my grandfather. There were a 4-family unit, and my mother was the only one that migrated to the United States, and they stayed behind. But yeah, I think 79 was the first year that my father's older sister came, and then my father's oldest brother, because my father was the second youngest of 6 kids. My father didn't migrate until 82, I believe. 1982. I was born in 82, so my father had left a few months before I was born, and we arrived here in, I believe, January or February of 1983, and we've been in LA ever since. You know, I mean, that's why I'm saying, you know, LA is my home.
I get it. I mean, I moved to from Mexico City to Chicago when I was 4 or 5. Yeah. And again, like, I love Chicago. That I am a Chicagoan, you know. I like rep the city. I love it. It's my hometown, you know. Yeah. So just so, like, the people that aren't familiar, you know, like, you come to LA, you're undocumented. Like, what is the life like? You know, what are you growing up like?
You know, it was very poor, but it was very normal. You know what I mean? It's like la pobreza in the United States. This is something that my father, bless his heart, and his soul, used to say. He said, you know, la pobreza in the United States is lujo compared to la pobreza that you live in Guatemala. And we're talking about, you know, my grandmother's house, my father's mother's house, you know, was made out of like sheet metal rooftops and adobe, you know, and planks of wood just kind of put together.
People underestimate the wealth in this country.
Oh, most definitely. You know, I mean, no running water. My mother did. My grandmother's house didn't have running water and like an actual toilet until, I believe, like the mid 90s. I'm like, that's insane. And you know, my primas who used to go to Guatemala when we were kids, because they were born here, they were American. My primas used to hate it. And I would go, why do you hate it? And he goes, because, man, it's like there's no hot water. I go, so what do you do? It's like, well, la abuelita has to walk to the barranca, has to take like buckets of water, bring back the buckets of water, heat the water under a wood fire, and then make a warm bath for us. And she can only do that like once a week. And I'm like, that's fucking insane, dude.
And you tell anyone that in the US, and that they're more than willing to make the journey to another country. If it was reversed, it'd be like, yes, but because it's reversed, it's like, how bad could it be?
Oh, it's very bad. If you don't have, it's okay if you do it once every now and then. Oh, we're camping, you know what I mean? But when that's the norm, you know what I mean? And the norm is, you may or may not eat today, and you may or may not have, somewhere warm to stay at night. It really does affect your psychosocial
bomb at a bus stop.
Exactly.
Like, that's no condition to try to raise a newborn.
Exactly. So they came, they came in life, and life in the United States was very difficult for us. My parents were young. I come from from a family that has experienced a lot of intergenerational trauma that I'm now, working on healing. A lot of abuse, a lot of violence. My father, bless his heart, was an alcoholic. He was an abusive alcoholic. He used to beat my mother. And so, I grew up watching a lot of that, and I grew up experiencing a lot of that. And then my parents separated when I was a kid, and and I was that kid. It's like, oh, pobrecito, his mom left him. He's basically abandoned, and his dad is like, I don't know, we don't see his dad. So like my tia raised me. You know what I mean? And my siblings were split up. So there was a sense of normalcy that came from that dysfunction, because you learn to adjust and to adapt to it. But I went to elementary school here, middle school, high school. Hip hop culture became my escape. Hip hop culture became my primary identifier. So then when we talk about culture and cultura and how I identify primarily as a lyricist, as a member of the hip hop community, because that's what saved my life. That's what helped me focus. That's what gave me purpose. That's what basically raised me. There's a reason why Tupac lives on my arm. It's not because I'm trying to be cool and make a fashion statement. I could give a fuck what people think about me and whether or not they think I'm cool. It's about me honoring my my past and where I come from and what I've experienced and I lived through. So growing up was, celebrated all the holidays. And it's funny, right? Because it's like we celebrate Thanksgiving. You don't know why the fuck you're celebrating Thanksgiving.
We still do that too. And I'm like, I'm so over it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, tía, ¿por qué celebramos Thanksgiving? Ay, vos, es que es el día del turkey. Pero ¿por qué, tía? ¿Por qué? Pues creo se me hace porque fue cuando vinieron, ¿cómo se llaman esos? Los que vinieron de Europa, vos. Creo que son los pilgrims, se le dicen, ¿verdad? Sí, los que vinieron acá y prácticamente celebraron con los indios de aquí y les regalaron comida y les regalaron ponchos. Le digo, no, tía, les robaron la tierra, los envenenaron, los hicieron enfermos, los mataron y los volvieron esclavos. No jodas, mijo. I have no idea.
But it's funny because, of course, they're just responding to the dominant culture, the narrative.
Most definitely.
And also the culture and narrative we're being taught at schools and then bringing home.
Most definitely.
To repeat back to, like, our own families. And that's how we grow up in, like, these
yearning to assimilate. The desire to belong. To not be like, I don't want to stick out because I don't want people to know I don't have papeles.
Exactly. And I feel like we're definitely moving away from that now, where I think for so long the point was to come to this country, assimilate, be like everybody else. Of course, that bar is set at whiteness and what's appropriate for that. And I think now we're sort of starting to embrace our differences, embrace our ethnicities, our culture, our countries of origin. And in the past, it was just like, it definitely did a lot of damage to our own like way of thinking about ourselves, because you're, of course, and then when
self-hate.
you have self-hate, and we all carry it, we all have to like work against it. And it's also interesting that then you have that added point to not only assimilate so people like you so you fit in, but assimilate so no one catches you, no one points you out.
And that was the big one, right?
Yeah.
And you know, there's a point in my show where, you know, my mother tells me, you know, never let anyone know that you don't have papeles, because if they come for you, they're going to turn around and they're going to come for me. Yeah. And then who's going to take care of your brothers and your sister, you know?
It's a domino effect to your family. And that's what you're taught. I remember a girl in my high school class told a teacher that she couldn't get a license because she was undocumented. And my jaw hit the floor. Like, I was like, don't tell her that. Like,
don't ever fucking say that.
Like, I was like, that's not something you tell, because again, and that's part of the trauma, you are told as a child, like, because it's here. Life and death, really, for your entire family. You can't afford to make a mistake. The youngest amongst you must know. And that, because I hear a lot of people that didn't find out till they were like trying to get a license. And my family was very clear, like, from the start, we don't
have papers.
And this will endanger all of us.
Right. Well, when I was a kid, I mean, people asked me, you know, a couple of interviews, they say, well, you know, how old were you when you realized that you didn't have papers, or, you know, when did you discover this? And I go, well, I've kind of known my whole life, because my father used to, you know, when I would be bad and I would do bad things, he would get really pissed off at me, and he'd be like, you know, if you don't behave, te voy a mandar a Guatemala. I'm going to send you back to Guatemala. And guess what? In Guatemala, you don't have X, Y, Z, and you're going to starve, and you can't come back because you're a mojado, and you don't have papers. So once you leave, you can't come back, you know, and it was something like that, right? It was that severe. Or, you know, one time my cousin wants me to go to SeaWorld with her, and I was maybe like 7 or 8 at the time, you know, I was a little kid, and my prima goes to my tia, my dad's sister, all excited, and she's like, "Oh, mom, can Alex go to SeaWorld with us?" And my tia was like, "I know, mijo, you can go to the SeaWorld, porque in SeaWorld, in San Clemente piden papeles, because there's the checkpoint down there, right?" And she's like, "Y si se dan cuenta que vos no tenés papeles, te van a mandar a Guatemala." So I knew that these papers, like whatever these papers were, they must be really important papers. You know, and I didn't know what they looked like, and I didn't know, you know what I mean? They're papers. It's just like when you're a kid and everyone's talking about el señor, el señor this, el señor that, and they're like, what señor? Like, what does he look like? Where is he? Where does he live? Does he have a job? You know, like. And
the funny thing about that, it's like we're always talking about like papeles, paper, like who has them, who doesn't, who needs them, and then at the end of the day, if you do get to cross that threshold, it really just is a piece of paper. Like,
it's not even a piece of paper anymore, bro. No, it's a fucking card. It's a fucking plastic card. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, for residency.
Yeah.
But like the certificate you get. When when you cross their finish line. That it is truly a piece of paper.
That's right.
And then you feel like, well, what the hell was this all worth for? That was it. That was all of this, my whole life. Not being able to go to SeaWorld because everyday things, because they were traumatic and I was possibly in danger. Yeah. And then you get it and you're like, okay.
Yeah. It's kind of like the way I felt when I first got DACA, when I was approved for my DACA, you know, and I was like, and that one was really special for me because, you know, it was for the first time in my life after being undocumented and having to survive in the shadows. You know, I mean, I went to college, I graduated, I have a degree. I mean, and to not be able to work.
Yeah. So explain to people life before DACA, you know?
So life before DACA was like nuts, man. You know what I mean? It was one of those things where, I grew up in the streets of Los Angeles. My parents separated when I was a kid. Like I said, my father was constantly working. I didn't grow up with my mom. I chose to live with my dad, and then, court orders determined that the 2 oldest would live with the father, the 2 youngest would live with the mother. So that's how it was for many years. I would visit my mom on the weekends every now and then. I was misguided. I was angry. I gave into a lot of what was popular at the time, which was prevalent with gang culture. So I ran the streets and I did the things that people do when they run the streets. Then my father passed away when I was 16, and then I lost my father, and then I kind of went into this really, really, really dark place in my life, where I sought escape through drugs and through, unhealthy behavior and things like that. And then I got lucky, dude. Like, for some miracle in life, I was saved because I got tapped to do a documentary about public education reform. And so there's a documentary out there about me. You see me as a 16, 17-year-old called AKA Creek, educating a big city schoolboy. And it was a documentary that was shown in a bunch of film festivals. It won a couple of awards. And I got my first taste of what it's like to be in the limelight, in the spotlight. It was about how education in the United States is failing the inner city children. And they used me and my siblings and my family as, as the sample population of, like, look how the schools are failing this one kid who's smart, he's bright, he clearly, he knows things, but he's also really angry, and he's also from a socially economically disadvantaged background, and they're immigrants.
And they know you were undocumented?
They did not know that I was undocumented. That's one aspect of the documentary that was never it was never revealed. They didn't know until they were editing it. When I was just like, oh, hey, by the way, I don't have papers. They're like, what? But
it's for safety, for your safety.
It's for safety, for safety purposes. So, what was beautiful about it was that I gained two mentors. I gained two education mentors who are still very much involved in my life today. One of them was the producer and the director of the film.
Okay, cool.
And he mentored me, here in California. And the other mentor was the former assistant secretary of education for the Reagan administration. And he basically said, look, kid, if you can finish high school, I'll pay for you to go to college.
Okay.
And we'll take it on a semester by semester basis. And every semester I look at your grades, and depending on your semesters, I will continue paying for school. And true to his word, he, as long as I made my grades and as long as I kept my GPA up, I was able to go to school for free. So when I graduated college, I graduated without any kind of debt. And he's been very important in my life. He's been an integral part of my survival, I guess you can say, because for many years being undocumented, I didn't pay taxes. I didn't know that I had to. I got in trouble later on in life because I had to do what I had to do. I worked with a fake social security number for many years. I learned a trade working a fake social security number. My background is in social work, so I've done social work for the majority of my adult life in geriatrics, so helping old people, and I earned my bones in a psychiatric nursing home, but I didn't have a degree. And I just learned it simply by doing it, but I became really, really good at what I did. And part of the reason why I got in trouble and I eventually ended up, going to jail was because I cracked open this really big case on some dude that had been abusing old people for many years in Orange County, and my documentation and my investigation was able to put him away for a long time.
That's good.
But then they put the spotlight on me because I needed to testify. They sent me a court subpoena. They're looking me up in DMV records. They can't find me. So all of a sudden I'm like, deuces. I quit my job of 10 years. And then I go underground, and then I'm homeless for 6. You know what I mean?
And that's the thing though too. Like, people make the argument of, like, if you target, like, undocumented communities, they won't call the cops, they won't report crimes. My family did that. But also, like, you can't even be the hero. You can't even, like, point something out, point a wrong, fix something, put your neck out there, because you don't know who's going to be looking. And then when they do, like, what happens? You have to, like, leave behind this 10-year, like, career that you've been building that you couldn't supplement with schooling because that wasn't, like, readily available because you're undocumented. You don't get, like, federal loans and that's the reality. Like, just like that, you had to, like, and through, like, what fault did you do? Like,
my biggest fault was I did my job too well.
Yeah,
that's what it was.
And then and that's why I don't like when people are like, like deport like undocumented people in jail, and you're just like if the system is not set up to like if you're not a citizen or if you don't have your green card, you can't like pursue higher education. You can't like there's so many things that, again, you don't have access to any like public benefits.
Yeah.
Like you're doing it all on your own. And when you are left to your own, like do your own resources, like, and you can't legally exist in a system to pay your taxes, to like pay your rent, get an apartment, then, people end up in jail because they're desperately trying to like survive.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the common myth, right? Is that they think that undocumented people come to this country and they rob citizens of resources. That's not true. Undocumented people don't have access to any kind of public benefits. Undocumented people are not allowed to take advantage of anything. You can't get food stamps, you can't get cash aid, you can't get public housing vouchers, you can't get health care, you can't get anything. You're lucky if you get a bus pass that is discounted, because you literally don't have access to any of that, because all of that requires a social security number and a legal form of ID. I mean, and it's worse now than it was 10, 15 years ago. And so when I was going through what I was going through when I was working as a social worker, I mean, there was a sense of pride. It's like I started my job as a janitor, and I moved all the way up, and I had healthcare benefits. I got braces, I had glasses, I'm in good health, and all of a sudden I lose all of that over a mistake. And the mistake that I made was that I put myself out there too much, and there's actually a poem in Wet, because I infused the narrative with a lot of spoken word, and there's a poem that talks about that talks about like what you can do, what you can't do. It talks about just the legalities that you have to kind of bypass just to survive. It's like they set it up in such a way that in order for you to survive, you don't have a choice but to break the law. And they're saying, well, you shouldn't break the law, because if you break the law, well, you're a criminal. It's like, well, it depends on what you're criminalizing.
Yeah, exactly. Because we have as a culture, assume every person in jail is a bad person that they're protecting us from. Right. And it's like, what are the laws we're passing? How are we policing people? What are we criminalizing? And look at that before you decide to judge an individual that is in prison. And like, for what, and that's, I think, is something we're starting to like really look at for criminal justice reform. But I think as a culture, we're still thinking like every person in jail is a bad person. They were bad from the start.
Right.
And also, like, those people don't also just get out. Like, no one gets locked up and they throw away the key. Like, eventually they come back into our society. And how do we want those people to live? Do they want to just go right back? Or do we want to, like, actually, like educate and give them a shot? Because the whole point that they're in there is because they never had a shot. So,
right. Most definitely. Yeah.
So, like, what is the way our prison system works and looks like if we're not rehabilitating?
If you have papers, because if you don't have papers, you're getting a flight.
You're getting a flight,
and they're sending. And some of these people, right? They're legitimate reasons for why they leave their countries. I mean, they have reasons that So I knew of a guy who came to the United States, escaping persecution, escaping the gangs. Because what happened was that people think that Latino or Latinx gangs are a problem that originated in Latin America. No, señor.
Nope.
The gangs that are now so rampantly wild in Latin America were originated down the street from where we are right now. They were originated on Irolo Park, where Mara Salvatrucha was started, where 18th Street was started on the east side of town. Like all of these gangs were started here in the United States. And when they passed Proposition 187 back in the mid-90s, and they criminalized being basically a person of color, a Latinx individual, that was the perfect opportunity for police to ask people for their papers. And it's like, okay, you don't have papers? Boom, we're locking you up, and then we're deporting you. I mean, they had massive deportations in the 90s, and they were deporting entire movements of people. Some of them were gangs, some of them were not gangs. They were just people that looked the way that you and I look, right? So, it's all kinds of fun.
And again, like, like the caravans that's on the news and being like demonized are a direct result of, you know, U.S. policies. You know?
Absolutely.
From the gangs all the way to like, you know, the government set up there, the military trained.
Yeah.
You know, it's a byproduct of our own inaction or like overexertion of our policies into a region that was fine without.
And that's why we don't have the luxury to hate on each other anymore. It's funny because I was talking to somebody, I believe like a week or two ago, and you know, this was a guy from El Salvador. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy from El Salvador, my best friend's from Nicaragua, and there was the two guys from Mexico, and we were just having a conversation, right? Yeah. And it's like, yeah, man, you know, they always tell me that, like, you know, Salvadorians hate Mexicans and Mexicans hate, you know, Guatemalans and blah, 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 you know, but all you are cool, man. You guys are cool. And I said, yeah, brother, but, you know, you got to realize that we don't have the luxury to hate on each other anymore because everyone else hates on us. So we have to unite under the common core of our ancestry and who we were and who we are in order to become what we're supposed to be. Because the one thing that they want to do is that they want to keep Mexicans with Mexicans, Salvadorians with Salvadorians, Guatemalans with Guatemalans, et cetera, because if we don't unite under a common cause, and the common cause, I believe, is not fighting the enemy. I think the common cause is an auto-realization and manifesting our best selves so that we can heal from the traumas that have been inflicted upon us, right? That's the only way that we can strategically look. I mean, and this is just us as a culture. We haven't even touched the surface of what it's like to help heal our women.
Yeah.
We have to start healing, helping and contributing in the healing of our women. We have to begin to empower our women because our women is who's going to save us. Our women are the ones who are stepping up to the plate right now, and they're creating the foundation of what's going to be our salvation. Men had their turn. We had our time. We fucked it up. Look what we're leaving. And leave it to a woman to clean it up, right? Pero we have to contribute, and the way that we contribute is that we have to check our own toxicity, our toxic masculinity, and our own prejudices and privileges that we're born with, being male. And we have to support them by giving them the platforms that they need in order for them to grow into their power, you know?
Yeah, because I do think, you know, as like a Latinx people, we're so willing to fight for our fight. But then when you break it down to like Latinx women and like Latinx like queer folk, then it's like, well, that's their thing. Like we're leading the charge for all of us. But it's like, and the same thing with like the different countries, you know, like the people that are the kids dying in like detainment are the fifth kid. All five kids are from Guatemala. Yeah,
they're all Guatemalan.
And like just because I'm from Mexico doesn't mean like when that started happening with a lot of people from Central America, I was like, yeah, that's our people. I had the privilege to come here on a plane, but that's because I had privilege.
Yeah.
And again, my family wasn't running from a bomb under a bus stop.
Right.
Like, again, like you can't try to like compare and then say, well, you know, like, well, why are they doing it that way? It's like, no, like everybody has their own journey, and it's not a journey of practicality, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you left your job, you were homeless. So like, and again, like you were talking about like, how did you, like, you were talking about the documentary, like, did you know you were smart? Did you know you were bright? Did you know that you had like...
That's one thing I got to be honest with you, man. It's like, I was very fortunate in that respect. I grew up very poor, and I saw a lot of violence, and I saw things that, and experienced things that no child should ever experience and to witness.
Yeah. And what kept the light, you know?
Yeah. I'm a survivor of you know, physical, mental, emotional, sexual abuse. You know, I've been through all of that. And I think what kept me going was that in spite of that, I was always told that I was smart. I was always told that I was special. I was told by my teachers. I was one of those kids that the teachers just kind of floated to and wanted to foster. You know, they wanted to help me. You know, every single teacher I ever had when I was a child saw something in me, and they were very protective of me, and they were very kind and loving, and you know, they would constantly have conferences with my parents and going, you know, this kid's got potential.
Yeah.
This kid's going to do something with his life. He's destined to do something great.
And that's all it takes too. If you just have people, teachers are a great resource for this, to be like, you have something, you're smart, you're bright. Like,
right.
You have, it's so easy to like look down on yourself and think you're not worth that much. But if you have like a person of authority really looking out for you and pointing out what's good about you.
Right.
And the light, like, so you left your job, you were homeless, but like, where was the light then? Like, how did, like,
what kept me going, two things that kept me going was, you know, my daughter's mother and I split up when my daughter was about 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So I was maybe, how old was I? I was maybe like in my early 20s. I was maybe like 23 when that happened, or 24. Wow, that was a long time ago. I'm reflecting now. I was like, oh, I'm old as shit now. And you know, shortly after is when, you know, I lost my job and everything. But what kept me alive, what kept me going, and the reason why I didn't do something stupid and hurt myself or take my own life was because I loved my work. I love being an actor. I love being an artist. And that's what saved my life, my work. I committed myself to my work 100%. And even though I was doing the work just as a college student, I was just, you know, I was learning the craft of acting in a community college, and I had a good mentor who is still my acting mentor to this day, and he's a great friend, and I love him very much. That's what kept me going. I remember, you know, one time I was couch surfing. I was staying in different people's houses. You know, one time I couldn't afford to pay $150 a month to sleep in somebody's corner of their living room. You know, so they threw my stuff out and they changed the locks, and I just literally everything that I owned was in a giant laundry bag and a backpack. And so I hid the laundry bag behind a dumpster. And I just walked. And I would find a bus stop, and I would sit at a bus stop, and I would take a nap, and I would close my eyes and try to preserve my energy. And then when I felt that I couldn't be there any longer, I'd walk, and then I'd go to a different bus stop, and I'd do the same thing again. And then as soon as day broke, I would go find a park and go sleep in a park. And wait until my daughter would get out of school, and I would walk to her school and pick her up, and then walk her to the library. And we would spend maybe 2-3 hours in the library. I'd help her do her homework. I would do this every day with her, and that was the quality time that I had with my kid until her mom came to pick her up. And if it was on a day that I was in school, Monday through Thursday I was in school. I took as many classes as I could. And I would be at school from like 8 in the morning until like 6 in the afternoon. And then rehearsal started at 7. So I had an hour break, and then rehearsal would end at 11. And so I spend my entire days just focused on acting, learning acting, studying acting, reading about theory, reading about Stanislavski and the different forms of acting. And my life became seeing my daughter and acting. And acting is what saved my life.
Yeah, that's amazing that the work was able to like sustain you, because, you know, doing that routine, you know, it's something that can like play with your sanity a little bit, you know, like when you don't have somewhere you can just be, you have to, and you're I'm sure you were constantly being policed on where you could be and where you couldn't, like stand, sit, like
well, I mean, the beautiful thing was that because I had a student ID, I had somewhere that I belonged. I was a student at the college, you know, and I could be there. And I could be there from 8 in the morning and wait until the library opened, and then go take a nap in the library. And because everybody knew me in the theater department, nobody ever gave me a hard time if I took a shower in the costume room. And who's in there? Oh, hey, sorry, you know, last night was really busy. I didn't have a chance, and I kind of smelled. They're like, oh yeah, you're fine, Alex. Alex, you're fine. Do you need some soap? I mean, I got some extra soap here. It's like, yeah. You know what I mean? So, the community there, the community in the theater department where I trained really took care of me. And it wasn't until years later, and working on my undergrad at UC Irvine, that I took a break from acting, but I got really depressed. And that was the biggest reminder that my purpose and my calling was to be an artist. What kind of artist? I don't know. I'm still discovering what kind of artist I am, what kind of artist I'm becoming, based on the work that I'm doing and the body of work that I'm developing. But it wasn't until DACA that I was able to go back to social work after many years, because I was like, look, I'm going to starve being an artist. That's clear. That's very evident. Yeah. I'm going to starve being an artist. I don't have papers. So because I don't have papers, I can't join the unions. I can't join SAG-AFTRA. I can't join Equity. They're not going to give me an agent, because an agent can't book me if I don't have a social security number. So I have to do this by myself. Once I got DACA, I said, all right, cool. I'm gonna stabilize myself. And I did, man, true to my word. I got my DACA May 1st of 2013 after being homeless for 5 years. And by July 15th, which was May, June, July, so like 2.5 months, by July 15th, I had a full-time job, I had a car, and I had an apartment. And by August of that year, my daughter came to live with me.
And it just speaks to how with DACA, it lifted some restrictions, and how like a change in a policy from a president can turn your life into something you've been trying to do this whole time. You know?
Yeah.
And it's just like that. Again, it's just, I'm sure it's a piece of paper. And with that, you're just like, oh, okay, now I have access to all these things. And then you're sort of like, but why didn't I before? You know, like, just because.
Right. Yeah. 3 months, bro. 3 months. I say it in my show. If my mom would have came to this country just 6 months sooner, my life would have turned out completely different. But I'm also grateful for it. And the reason why I'm grateful for it is because it taught me an unwavering discipline. It taught me to be disciplined. I am not allowed to slack off. I have to be better than average just to play with average. You know what I mean? I was fortunate enough to do the show at Yale. It's like fucking Yale, bro. Like, people like me don't go to Yale. I have tattoos, bro. I'm from the hood. I talk like a hood motherfucker. You know what I mean? Like, I scare those people. You know what I mean? So, like, for me to go to Yale and for me to do my show and to be acknowledged for my work and having actors that are renowned in their field that teach there, you know, and to praise my work and to say, young man, your skill. Wow. Where did you train? You know?
Another piece of paper. Like,
exactly.
Do you have this piece of paper that tells us, like, no, I had to do it a whole other way?
No, I remember, one of their professors came, and I mean, and her resume reads like a lifetime achievement award. And this lady is awesome. She came up to me, and after she saw Wet, and she said, young man, your skill set is amazing. She goes, your performance was almost flawless. I couldn't see what you were doing, which is beautiful. She said, where did you train? And I looked at her, and I looked her dead in the eye, and I said, community college, ma'am. And she just she lit up, and she was so happy. She was happy because she acknowledges, as a true artist, she acknowledges that there's no institution that can bottle up success. You know what I mean? There's no level of, yes, you can have innate talent. You can be innately talented, and you can have organic talent. But if it's not trained, if it's not developed, then it's wasted potential. And you could have someone that has no talent or has very little talent, but if they're committed and they stick to it, with time they get better. With time they will become good or great or excellent. You know what I mean? So I was validated because of the work, but it goes back to those days when I had nothing to eat, where I had nothing to wear, where I had nowhere to sleep, and the only thing that kept me going was me running my Shakespeare lines. When I want to be the best Capulet in this college production of Romeo and Juliet, and I have to stay focused on this, because if I start thinking about how fucked up my life really is, I'm not gonna make it to the morning. You know what I mean? So a lot of coffee, a lot of cigarettes.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to interview you too, because I think your story is one that we're barely scratching the surface of in the media, in representation, in what it's like to be undocumented, grow up undocumented. Not even to mention of being a DACA recipient, or even being formally undocumented. Like, that's such a spectrum and 3 different whole identities and experiences. And I wanted to have you on so you could share for other people that aren't familiar, and share for people that are like, that's my story too, because it's important that we find each other, and it's important that other people hear the stories they just have never heard, and the way that we can open up avenues for you, for other undocumented people, for DACA recipients, for formerly undocumented people, to say, like, because you see so many immigration stories on TV, and sometimes you're like, that's not how that works. Like,
yeah, and I mean, and you're right. They're capitalizing on it, but it's what I always say. If you don't want other people to tell your story, you better be the one to start telling it. Yeah. You better be the one to start creating that narrative. And so, as a writer, I have a responsibility to my own history, to be able to put my story out there in such a way that's authentic and organic, and just keeping it 100. And that's the hip hop in me. You know what I mean? It's like, as a lyricist, my fellow MCs out there, if they hear me spit, okay, the moment they could catch a front at any given moment, if it's there. But if I keep it 100, they'll feel it. They'll vibe with me. I don't have to break it down. I don't have to, I don't have to edit the slang. You know what I mean? Like, they get it, right? And that's universal. Truth is universal. Yes. And when people hear truth, feel truth, experience truth, it doesn't matter if you're from Guatemala or Latin America in itself. You could be an immigrant from Europe. I was fortunate enough. I did the show last week at UCLA, and I had this woman from Hong Kong who came up to me, and she was asking me questions, and then she said, "Can I ask you one more?" She asked me like 4 questions. She kept coming back, and you could see that she was really shy. Yeah. And she goes, "Can I ask you just one more question?" And she goes, "No, it's okay." And she walked away. And then she stops herself and she turns around. She goes, "No, what advice would you give to someone who's kind of like in a similar boat as you?" And I was like, "Oh, is this like a friend or a family member?" And she was like, she's looking around. Yeah. She's like, it's for me. I'm kind of a DACA recipient, and I recognize that shame. I recognize that embarrassment. I recognize that fear and that hurt in her eyes. And I said, "Oh." And I said, "Oh, well, let's talk." You know what I mean? I'm like, "Come on, dude. Let me school you on some game." You know what I mean? And then, I started asking her about herself. And at first she was really cautious. And I said, "Look, your options are limited, but you have options." And that's the big difference. It's like, people, there's some people like us that don't have options. There's some people like us that because they eliminated certain programs, or because they came in at a certain time, or because they were too old to apply for the program to begin with, they don't have these options. There are over 14 million undocumented people that are living through this crisis right now in the United States. Only a little over 800,000 are DACA recipients. And those DACA recipients are getting older. We're getting older. You know what I mean? And it's starting to affect our children,
And will DACA even be around?
And will DACA even be around in the next couple of years? We can't wait around for this administration to throw us a bone. We can't wait for these politicians to do something for us, because guess what? We're 2 years into this insane presidency and they still haven't done anything for us. We're used as a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, I really talked to her, and I gave her some, I gave her some perspective. I wouldn't say that I gave her advice, because I don't know about giving advice. You know what I mean? And that's the social worker in me. It's like, I am not allowed to tell you what to do, but I can tell you where you can go to figure it out for yourself. So hopefully that instilled some hope in her. But it's like, but she saw herself reflected in my story. And she's from different part of the world.
And that's exactly what you're saying. It's truth. Like, as storytellers, we tell the truth, and it informs people and it connects with people. That's why when I saw your poster up in Atwater Village, I was like, oh, immediately I was like that's someone like me. Like, I have to talk to this person because, again, we have to find community within each other, and we try to tell this truth on stage and in short films, but the bigger work is, how do we get a film about this? How do we get TV series about this? Because I missed your wet show. Like, I missed it. So it sucks, because I was like, I feel like I would have loved it.
It's gonna come back.
Please.
It's gonna come back next year. Yeah.
But again, it's like, but that's like local to like wherever you're traveling, what's like available, and if we have it on a TV series, if we have it on film, then it could reach potentially millions of people.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, and that's what we're working on right now with my team, is to create more exposure for it. I do have some engagements. Unfortunately, I don't have any engagements in the Southern California area, at least not in the foreseeable future, not this year. But we're hoping that we can get something going for 2020. Yeah. I have a feeling that 2020 is going to be a big year. It's going to be an important year for the undocumented community, because the fight is happening now. The fight is happening now, and we need all of the visibility. We need all of the narratives that are being told. I get very happy and I get very excited when I see people that are putting their stories on film, they're putting their stories on TV, you're putting their stories in books and audiobooks and things like that, because we need that. We need to see ourselves reflected. We need to see that being undocumented is just a circumstance. It is not who we are. It's what I've been saying for the last 2 years that I've been doing this show, is that I am not my circumstance. Me not having a legal status in the country does not take away who I am, what my morals, my ethics, my values, my points of view, who I am in the community, and a member of this community, an active member of this community, as a citizen of Los Angeles, as a citizen of the world. Having good English skills shouldn't determine whether or not I'm a good person. Oh, you're one of those good immigrants because you speak good English. It's like,
again, it's the bar set by whiteness.
Exactly. What you were saying in the beginning is just like, well, why should it be that way? You know what I mean? It's like, I purposely speak Spanish around people like that now. You know what I mean? I purposely pronounce Spanish words like, oh, I'm going to Montebello. Oh, you mean Montebello? Yeah. They have a nice mall at Montebello. You know what I mean?
Because again, it's like, why am I changing the language?
Absolutely.
For you to be comfortable, for what's acceptable. And that's why we have to tell our stories, to find each other, to project a bigger truth to people. And also why the gatekeepers, who are majority white people, have to let us in, have to, get, because like the stories don't exist because the people who are living it aren't in the room. Aren't at the table, and the way it's being told now is not very well, because they don't have the people in the room. Like, I hear so much about consultants being brought in, and I'm like, how about you just hire a writer that's lived, All right, so to wrap up, we want to hear any writers you want to shout out, other Latinx writers, creators who you admire, who you think I should interview.
I mean, there's a lot of writers that I have a lot of love for. My good friend Israel Lopez Reyes, he's a phenomenal actor and playwright. He's he writes about us, and he authentically captures the voice of us. Perfect. Of our people, which is great. I think he'd be awesome. Shout out to Izzy, because he's really out there doing the work. Shout out to my boy Luis Kelly Duarte, who's another Latinx writer who writes incredible narratives, who's working on getting his first play produced, called Esther Rosenberg. Let's see who else. I mean, I'm a big fan of Patricia Zamorano.
I love her.
I love Patricia. Shout out to Patricia. That's the big homie right there. Like, I love her so much. I admire her work so much. She's an amazing writer and a really good friend. And
I think she's an unsung hero for
man,
our community that the people need to know.
Let me tell you something, man. Patricia is one of the kindest, most dopest artists I have met. I mean, her writing is just so raw and so real and visceral, and you know, she really is somebody that I admire and I look up to, and I'm very fortunate to be to consider her a friend. So she's dope. Shout out to Teatro y Cuento. Mariana is out there doing the good work and bringing Latinx communities together through theater experiences. So I'm grateful for her. Lindsay Haley, Josefina Lopez, you know, who's you know, she's our big sister. You know, she's the pillar of our community. I'm grateful because Casa 0101 has always been a home for me. Evelina Fernandez at the Los Angeles Theater Center has always been very kind to me. Jose Luis Valenzuela, Jeffrey Rivas, and the whole Latino theater company have been huge supporters of my work, and I'm grateful for them as well. There's so many. There's just so many. I could keep going. You know what I mean? I could keep going. You know, and like, you know, God bless Tanya Saracho for the work that she's doing, and bringing in Latinx writers. You know, even you know, season 2 of Vida, and I got a couple of friends who are in that, and I'm very excited for them, and I'm very grateful for them. So yeah, I mean, I can keep going, pero.
Okay, and where can people find you? Like, shout out your social media.
So you can find me my social media handle across the board, because I got my handles really early on in the game.
That's
so
good.
Across the board are just Alpharaoh, ALPHARAOH, and that's on Instagram, Twitter. I don't have Facebook anymore because Facebook is a lie, and Zuckerberg is a lie.
I'm on the same page on that.
Yeah, so I only have Twitter and I have Instagram, and I think that's all I need, because I was spending way too much time on social media. But you can find me under Alpharaoh. You can go to my website, www.documentedjourney.com, DACA MENTED journey JOURNEY.com.
Perfect. All right, and finally, you know, I'm gonna ask the guests to title their episode, because I want this to be an inclusive podcast, so that people, if they identify similarly, they listen, or also if they don't see their identity, they want to be like, oh, I want to make sure mine's represented. So the format is a blank Latinx writer. So like, how you can change it around, you can change the words, you can move them around.
A blank Latinx writer.
Yeah.
A MOJADO SECO Latinx writer.
Perfect. So thank you so much for being on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I did want to get your story, because I think yours is so important, definitely needs to be shared, and we need to have other people that have gone through the same thing to, you know, stand up. I think the great thing about DACA is a lot of people said, you know what, some of the pressure is off of what could happen to me. I'm going to speak out now. And I think we've gotten great, like, revolutionary people out of it. Like, I think the conversation is 20 years ahead of its time just because of DACA. And
and you know what, I do want to mention one last thing before we wrap, and you know, I gotta head out, but you know, I do want to give a big shout out, because none of where I am right now, which is on the other side of this whole situation, you know, I have a green card, is because of my partner. You know, shout out to my partner Elisa Noemi, who is also a brilliant writer. She's a biracial Latina. You know, she's a white Latina. She's half German, half Guatemalan. Pero todo corazón, you know what I mean? She really is the rock on which I stand on, and you know, was one of my best friends for many, many years who has chosen to embark with me on this leg of my journey. And it's been a sacrifice, and she's made a lot of sacrifices for me, and for our relationship. And so I just want to express extreme gratitude for Elisa, because a lot of times we look at our circumstances and we feel that we are alone, and that no one gets us, and that no one understands us. And then someone that is so beautiful, selflessly involved, comes into our lives and says, how can I help? And let me tell you that, no one was saying that to me when I was going through this crisis, when I just came back from Guatemala, when I didn't know if I was going to be allowed back into the country, and I didn't know if ICE was going to kick down my door. And she said, how can I be an ally to you?